national. Mr. Speaker, before I begin, I want to thank the wonderful people of the constituency of Marathon for so graciously supporting me as we work on their behalf and on behalf of all citizens of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I would also like to thank the teams of hardworking individuals who, beginning on Thursday, the 7th of September, 2017, and continuing on into the arrival of Hurricane Irma, worked hand in hand and shoulder to shoulder, assisting the residents of Marathon and the constituents in their preparations for that most unwelcome guest, Hurricane Irma. They offered themselves willingly, without hesitation, without reservation, and without reward, monetarily that is, other than the satisfaction of doing the right thing. And for them, I wish to publicly thank them for their assistance on a job well done. And as a display of community spirit, as a result of this display of community spirit, many residents of Marathon had the peace of mind to face Hurricane Irma just a little bit more confidently. Mr. Speaker, I also rise as the Minister of Environment and Housing. And as we are all aware, the Bahamas is vulnerable to climate change, and it's globally accepted as fact that small island developing states, also known as SIDS, such as the Bahamas, are actually the least responsible for climate change, but yet stand to lose the most, being the most vulnerable. And sadly enough, hurricanes such as Irma, one of the strongest storms ever recorded in the history of recording storms in the Atlantic Ocean, may become more commonplace as we move into a new era. Before the Bahamas came face to face with this monster Hurricane Irma, she wreaked havoc on our neighbors to the south, including Antigua and Barbuda. In fact, Barbuda's Prime Minister, Gadsden Brown, told the BBC that 95% of its buildings were destroyed and half of its population were rendered homeless by the passage of Irma. So there you have just an indication of how fortunate we were here in the Bahamas. And as she continued on her path of destruction, she impacted the islands of St. Martin, St. Barthélemy, also known as St. Bart's, Anguilla, St. Kitts and Nevis, the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Cuba, the Dominican Republic, Haiti, Turks and Caicos, and entered Bahamian waters, causing historic mass evacuations. In fact, until we get the final reports from NEMA, it is only then, until we get the final and complete assessments from NEMA, it's only then that we will really get the full picture of the impact of Hurricane Irma to our infrastructure and to the lives of Bahamians. Mr. Speaker, I grew up in a clapboard house at the foot of Kemp Road. And one thing I remember clearly about those days is we had a broom for sweeping the yard. And I know many of my colleagues in here remember that. And every Saturday, we had to sweep the yard. Every Saturday. And rake it. Today, we live in the Bahamas where we have become accustomed to garbage and waste. Whether derelict vehicles, old appliances such as refrigerators, stoves, bulk waste, garbage is everywhere. This problem did not happen overnight, nor will the fix be overnight, Mr. Speaker. But this is a journey that we must all take together. The key objective of this national cleanup campaign is to not only make the environment look clean, but to make a difference so that our cleanup efforts are permanent and sustainable. Mr. Speaker, the only way we could accomplish this is by lovingly helping our people to change their attitudes towards the environment and usher in a new environmental culture, and to understand that it is important to consistently keep the environment clean. Thus, broadly, we shall aim to, firstly, end decades of disregard for the natural and built environment. Instill in residents a desire to maintain their communities. Institute a no-tolerance standard to littering with stiff penalties. And continually make our Bahamas an attractive destination for our visitors, thereby improving the tourism product. But Mr. Speaker, this is a journey that we have to take together. And when we talk about improving the environment for our tourists, we have to remember that it is up to us, to value this country. We cannot expect somebody to come in this country and value it more than us. This is our job. Mr. Speaker, it's the people's time. And in the 2017 manifesto, it was the government's promise to the Bahamian people to inaugurate a national cleanup day. Well, to start this process, Mr. Speaker, my ministry has devised a national cleanup campaign. The first step in this initiative is to focus in and clean up the island of New Providence, and then to extend this program in an island-specific way to the other family islands. The island-wide cleanup campaign has multiple themes. Among them, keep our Bahamas beautiful, and is designed to encourage everyone to keep the Bahamas clean, green, and pristine by appealing to their pride in our country and imploring them to be a hero. Put it in the can. The People's National Cleanup Initiative will commence in October. The campaign will be executed in a 5-phase approach with the goal to fully clean New Providence and to maintain its cleanliness and improve the general aesthetics. Mr. Speaker, New Providence has been divided into 5 zones, and each zone correlates with a particular phase. And I will outline them briefly for you, Mr. Speaker, and my colleagues. Phase 1 will include Baintown, Grantstown, St. Barnabas, Engliston, and Centerville. And I'm pleased to announce that the member for Engliston, even though she's not here, and I will be sure to bring it to her attention upon her arrival, has promised me her full support. Phase 2, Bambootown, Pinewood, Nassau Village, South Beach, Seabreeze, and Fox Hill. Phase 3, Marathon, Freetown, St. Anne's, and Elizabeth. Phase 4, Fort Charlotte, Mount Moriah, and Killarney. Phase 5, Golden Isles, Southern Shore, Tall Pines, Garden Hills, Bambootown, Golden Gates, Carmichael, and South Beach. Mr. Speaker, the cleanup campaign will require the full commitment and involvement of communities and stakeholders alike. It is our intention to remove garbage, appliances, otherwise known as white waste, not white trash, as I've been advised, furnishings, derelict vehicles, rodents, and declared on lots. Mr. Speaker, this is a bold initiative, and it will be spearheaded by a committee presided over by the Department of Environmental Health Services. The cleanup campaign, Mr. Speaker, will employ the following components to ensure its success: speedy and effective removal of waste, efficient monitoring, ongoing public awareness and education, and enforcement. To buttress our educational efforts, Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Environment and Housing will liaise with the Bahamas Information Services to produce public service announcements and reach out to the print media, television, radios, BTC text messaging, social media, and we will create posters for billboards placed in strategic locations, all in an effort to change the attitudes of Bahamians towards their environment and foster a greater sense of pride in their surroundings and their community. To brand our messages, Mr. Speaker, the project will employ the use of a mascot to assist, to reach out to the young in the dissemination of our environmental objectives. As we all know, Mr. Speaker, it's a well-known fact that once we educate our children, they are the ones that will make their parents more aware. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, if you're 50 plus years old and you're still throwing garbage out of your window as you drive down the road in your nice car, or you have in the front of your house mounds of garbage left over from your various chicken-in-the-bag meals in the front of your house, there's very little we could do with you except to prosecute you. But we intend to target the young to shape the community. Mr. Speaker, the secret of an effective cleanup campaign is good enforcement. Appreciating this fact, there will be ongoing collaboration with the Health Inspectorate Division of the Department of Environmental Health Services, the Royal Bahamas Police Force, the Ministry of Works, the Ministry of Agriculture, and community leaders, who we expect to eventually take the lead in keeping their communities clean, green, and pristine. We have thus far, Mr. Speaker, and we have received corporate response and buy-in, and we anticipate in the months moving forward to receive even more so. Mr. Speaker, no project is executed effectively without challenges. Consequently, we have anticipated some of the challenges, and we expect to face high incidences of rodent infestation, derelict vehicles, bulk waste, overgrown lots, roadside garages, shanty towns, abandoned and dilapidated buildings, and cases of illegal dumping. We take this opportunity to assure the public that the Ministry of Environment and Housing is here to serve you, all of you, all residents and Bahamians alike, and that together, working hand in hand, along with corporate support, there's no challenge out there that we cannot overcome together. Mr. Speaker, please be assured that my ministry has taken into consideration the ability of the landfill to accept the increased influx of waste. And in that regard, Cabinet has agreed for a new RFP for the landfill to be issued. Mr. Speaker, it's accepted that we all have the basic right to work, live, and play in clean surroundings. Unfortunately, our country, particularly New Providence, is literally being buried in solid waste. It is a persistent problem, Mr. Speaker, and it impacts all of us as it ruins landscapes, negatively impacts ecosystems, impacts the cleanliness of neighborhoods, and contributes to crime. Mr. Speaker, in addition to the social costs of waste and littering, there's an economic cost as well. We anticipate that the cleanup New Providence will cost well in excess of $1 million, or perhaps more. But the need, however, is immediate. I therefore call on all residents, all well-wishers of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, to adopt a spirit of volunteerism. The government cannot do this alone. We're asking all neighborhood groups, all church groups, civic organizations, concerned citizens to band together and team up to clean up. Mr. Speaker, the ministry has established a hotline in order to coordinate the cleanup efforts. And the number is 322-6006. Mr. Speaker, volunteers and civil society are an essential component of this effort. So I make this appeal again in the strongest possible terms for everybody to participate. And so if you're tired of all the garbage around you, then volunteer. If you long for the days when Nassau was as clean as a whistle, then participate. We will not achieve the goals that we have set unless everybody plays their part, especially corporate Bahamas, who will be called upon in the very near future to adopt various roundabouts, parks, and roadsides. I want to advise all Bahamians at this point, and all residents, that as we clean up New Providence, we will embark on an aggressive enforcement campaign to ensure our labors are not in vain. Mr. Speaker, I end my communication by extending my sincere gratitude again to the great constituency of Marathon. Thank you.
Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the document do lie on the table. Further statements and communication by ministers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The chair recognizes the honorable member for Seabreeze.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to lay before this honorable House two pieces of legislation, two communications, one with respect to disaster preparedness and response Hurricane Irma, and the other with respect to the RISE project. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will begin with the disaster preparedness and response Hurricane Irma. Mr. Speaker, on the last occasion I spoke before this honorable House, I indicated then that a government that cares is a government that shares. Mr. Speaker, after only 4 months in office, this government, as they say, was baptized with fire, having to deal with a challenged economy, the lingering ravage of Hurricane Matthew, high unemployment, and the demand of a rapid response to crime and criminal behavior, in addition to the symptoms of social decay. Mr. Speaker, as if that was not enough, Hurricane Irma came fast and furious, challenged the government to live up to its mandate to ensure that it is the people's time. On May 10th, 2017, the Bahamian people, Mr. Speaker, elected a government that truly cares, and I say freely shares. Mr. Speaker, with careful thought and precision, this government conducted an ambitious operation led by the Honorable Member for Killarney, and in sticking with its oath to do no harm, our immediate response was to protect every life. Under the leadership of the Honorable Prime Minister, the government made the decision to evacuate 1,393 persons from our southern islands and Bimini. Mr. Speaker, though the entire Bahamas was expected to in some way or form be impacted by the strong winds or surge or rain from the impending storm, the government made the decision to provide immediate assistance to those residents with the greatest needs. Thus, through NEMA and the teamwork of multiple ministries and agencies, we extended voluntary evacuations to our brothers and sisters in Ragged Island, Mayaguana, Inagua, Crooked Island, Acklands, Long Key, and then to Bimini. Mr. Speaker, this goodwill gesture was extended to all residents of the islands mentioned in the Southern District, and due to the limited time, as the storm was in fact imminent, the offering was extended to the most vulnerable in Bimini. Mr. Speaker, to this pre-national movement administration, the Bahamian people matters. Mr. Speaker, as a part of our disaster preparedness, Social Services assisted NEMA specifically with regard to shelter management, and our response efforts included and includes ongoing socio-analysis and assessments of every individual affected and displaced as a result of the recent hurricane. The main mandate of the Department of Social Services as it relates to the management of shelters is found in Part 4, Sections 9 and 10 of the Disaster Preparedness Response Act 2006. The other sections of the Act that impact the Department's work are Part 3 of Section 8, which speaks to the National Disaster Response Plan, and Part 5, Section 2, which captures the responsibilities of public officers. Mr. Speaker, it is important to note that responding to and preparing for disasters and emergencies is the daily work of the Department of Social Services. Every day, we respond to needs accumulating as a result of unexpected deaths, change in economic circumstances, and emergency situations. In other words, Mr. Speaker, disaster management is second nature to the social workers, for it is what they are trained to do. Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the government of the Bahamas, without fear or favor, our work is focused on achieving and maintaining for all of our citizens an acceptable standard of living for the purpose of enhancing our social fabric and avoiding social decay. Mr. Speaker, our 2017 motto is, "We care." To that end, the Department of Social Services operates and manages 16 residential care facilities for children and the elderly and is responsible for the disaster preparedness plan. Mr. Speaker, in preparation for disaster hurricanes, the Department of Social Services, along with other government agencies, the National Emergency Management Agency, Royal Bahamas Defense Force, Royal Bahamas Police Fire Department, Ministry of Works, Department of Environmental Health, Water and Sewage, and non-governmental organizations, including the Bahamas Red Cross and the Salvation Army, inspected and approved 22 shelters in New Providence and 12 in Grand Bahama and 97 throughout the Family Islands. Of note, shelter training for staff is ongoing, Mr. Speaker, throughout the year in conjunction with NEMA. Social workers, support staff, and NGOs participate in that training. The purpose of the training is to ensure that staff are properly equipped to manage the shelters in New Providence, Grand Bahama, and the Family Islands. The necessary shelter kits were prepared, Mr. Speaker, by Social Services in advance for each shelter. They were labeled and delivered to each shelter and managed on a daily basis by a trained social worker in conjunction with representatives of NEMA, the Defense Force, and where appropriate, members of the Royal Bahamas Police Force, Defense Force. Mr. Speaker, I commend the hard-working men and women of the Defense Force who bravely stayed to protect property on the islands and who maintained order at the shelters. I am told, Mr. Speaker, they came on time, they were professional, and they were effective. Additionally, the police consistently conducted patrols and did not waver in their commitment to keep our people safe. Mr. Speaker, to the members of the armed forces, we do owe a debt of gratitude. And it would be remiss of me not to mention the prison officers at Her Majesty's Department of Correction and, of course, the Minister of National Security who led that charge. The health professionals, Mr. Speaker, were also, I say, last out and first in to ensure the maintenance of health throughout our Commonwealth, and to the Minister of Health and his team that worked along with Social Services, we are indeed grateful. Mr. Speaker, by government circular dated the 6th of September 2017, 2 days before the expected landfall of Irma on the capital, the Cabinet ordered that all government offices be closed and the securing of government property. Consequently, all staff of Social Services were instructed to spend a few hours securing their families and their homes and property, and as many, Mr. Speaker, reported back to work at the head office in the Sunshine Plaza, Blue Hill Road, where we operated for emergency purposes under a centralized system to ensure secure and effective delivery of services to and for the Bahamian people. At that centralized office, Mr. Speaker, clients were accommodated and emergency matters were prioritized. The work of social services continued 24/7, before, during, and after the passage of Irma. Mr. Speaker, I myself stayed throughout the night with the emergency operations team at the head office, which became our emergency operations center. Mr. Speaker, at NEMA's directive, the EOC, which is the Emergency Operations Center of both Social Services and NEMA, were activated simultaneously on Wednesday, September 6, 2017, for the pending Hurricane Irma. NEMA operated from the NEMA headquarters, Gladstone Road, and the Department of Social Services from its headquarters at the Sunshine Plaza, Blue Hill Road. All emergency operations centers remained open and operational until an all-clear bulletin was issued for the entire Bahamas by NEMA. On Wednesday, the 6th September 2017, a total of 1,023 residents were evacuated voluntarily from Mayaguana, Inagua, Crooked Island, and Long Key. The majority of the evacuees were housed by relatives, Mr. Speaker, and friends in New Providence, and in the first instance, 155 persons were immediately housed in the shelter at the New Providence Community Center, Blake Road. Once the New Providence Community Center met its capacity, 61 evacuees were transferred to the Kendall G. L. Isaacs Gymnasium shelter. And Mr. Speaker, though we encourage persons to bring their own food, etc., we are happy to report that the evacuees at the New Providence Community Center and the Kendall G. L. Isaacs Center were fed breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and snacks. Mr. Speaker, but this was due to the joint efforts of social services, the New Providence Community Center, Red Cross, Salvation Army, and a number of donations by others. And to these persons, we are indeed grateful. As a matter of fact, Mr. Speaker, at all the shelters I visited, it was reported that persons were properly cared for, they were welcomed and treated with dignity and with respect. The social workers were visible and on duty in the shelters 24/7, in addition to church volunteers and volunteers from the Bahamas Red Cross. Mr. Speaker, I think it is important to share at this time the definition of social work and to know the qualifications of a social worker. Mr. Speaker, social work is organized work directed toward the betterment of social conditions in the community, as by seeking to improve the conditions of the poor and generally to promote the welfare of children. To carry the title of a social worker, one must possess at minimum a bachelor's degree in social work or a related social science such as sociology, psychology, or criminal justice. Working along with the social worker are trainee welfare officers who must also possess at least a bachelor's degree in the related field, and then case aides who must possess no less than formal certification from an accredited institution. Above all, a social worker, Mr. Speaker, must be one that cares for others and are willing to treat people the way they would wish to be treated. Mr. Speaker, social workers, though normally of a humble approach, are respected as playing a crucial role in crisis management worldwide, and successive governments globally look to these individuals to weave the social fabric of societies and serve as gatekeepers of social development in our communities. Mr. Speaker, on Thursday, the 7th of September 2017, a total number of 370 persons were evacuated from Bimini and Cat Key. A large number of Bimini residents sought alternative accommodations. However, 6 persons registered at the Kendall G. L. Isaacs Gymnasium. On Friday, September 8, 2017, The Social Service Emergency Operations Center recorded the activation of 20 shelters in New Providence, 12 in Grand Bahama, and 97 throughout the Family Islands. At the issuance of the all clear by NEMA, shelters began the process, Mr. Speaker, of closing, and to date, only one shelter remains operational in New Providence, namely the Kendall G. L. Isaacs Gymnasium. All shelters in Grand Bahama are now closed post the passage of the tornado in central Grand Bahama and Marco City. Mr. Speaker, this is a list of the persons registered in the shelters during Hurricane Irma, according to our records. In New Providence, there were 22 shelters. We housed 1,044 persons. In Grand Bahama, there were 12 shelters. We housed 392 persons. In Abaco, there were 14 shelters. We housed 105 persons. Acklands was evacuated. In Andros and the Berry Islands, we housed 19 shelters. 503 persons were accommodated. In Bimini, one shelter was opened. 2 persons were accommodated. Many were evacuated, as indicated earlier. Cat Island, 8 shelters were open. 103 persons were received in the shelter. Crooked Island, 3 shelters were yet open, and 36 were received. Eleuthera, 20 shelters were opened. 463 persons were received in the shelter. Exuma, 16 shelters were open. 249 persons were received. Inagua was closed. We had that evacuation. Long Island, 10 shelters were open. 172 persons were accommodated. Mayaguana was closed, and Ragged Island, both of them had evacuations. Rumkey and San Salvador had 4 shelters opened, and 98 persons were accommodated. Mr. Speaker, we have a total of 129 active shelters, and that they accommodated 3,167 individuals during the passage of Hurricane Irma. Mr. Speaker, today, notwithstanding the devastation brought by Hurricane Irma, we are thankful to God that no lives were reported lost as a result of her passage. Indeed, Mr. Speaker, we can replace property, but we can never replace lives. Mr. Speaker, we know that extensive damage was suffered in Ragged Island, where many persons lost their homes and farm animals, and essential service operations were destroyed. Salina Point, Acklands, Mr. Speaker, was hardest hit in the Michael family. Bimini suffered from rising tide and damaged docks, while Grand Bahama is now faced with rebuilding of homes and lives post the blow of a powerful tornado. Mr. Speaker, the watchword now must be more than ever, together. No man is an island, and no one person or entity can be held responsible in situations like this. Mr. Speaker, we must all work together. No pointing fingers, Mr. Speaker. The only point that should be made is, what can I do? What can you do? What can we do together? Mr. Speaker, as first responders to social needs, Social Services has completed their on-site shelter evaluations and has already stepped in to provide emergency assistance to affected citizens as the country pools its resources to rebuild the lives of our people. Mr. Speaker, while the Department of Social Services is the principal responder to those in need, this period of fiscal prudence causes our team to exercise fiscal discipline. In that, I have directed, as far as practicable, strict compliance to the government's fiscal policy and efficient management of resources. In other words, Mr. Speaker, those with the greatest need should receive the greatest assistance, and the elderly, the disabled, and disadvantaged children will be our priority as far as possible within the allotted budget. Mr. Speaker, Urban Renewal, through its Small Homes Unit, has begun the administrative aspects of its minor roof repair projects, which will assist in prioritized minor roof repairs to complement NEMA's disaster recovery efforts. We anticipate sending items of relief from our storeroom to the most affected areas over the next few days, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the bottom line is not to be concerned with the donations of others, but to do your part. For in situations like this, Mr. Speaker, every hand helps. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude this first communication, I want to close by thanking God for his mercies towards the constituents of the Seabreeze constituency and the entire population of the Bahamas during the passage of Hurricane Irma. We thank the Honorable Prime Minister for his leadership and the supporting cabinet, Mr. Speaker, a cadre of professionals who continue to demonstrate their deserving of the country's uttermost respect as they lead our people from victory to victory. Finally, Mr. Speaker, special thanks to Captain Russell for his leadership and the team of NEMA, in addition to all agencies involved in the pre- and post-disaster management relief efforts. Mr. Speaker, for some reason, I am always reminded of a wise phrase coined by the man who revolutionized the automobile industry in the person of Mr. Henry Ford, and he said, "Coming together is the beginning. Staying together is progress, but working together, Mr. Speaker, is success." Mr. Speaker, I now turn to the second communication, with your leave, the RISE project.
Honorable member, can you table the first communication?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Honorable member, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as the Minister with responsibility for social services and urban development, I wish now to address the matter of a social safety net reform project known as RISE, which acronym stands for Renewing, Inspiring, Sustaining, Empowering. Mr. Speaker, on the 30th of August 2012, the government of the Bahamas entered into a loan contract with the Inter-American Development Bank for the execution of the Social Safety Net Reform Project. The Ministry of Social Services and Urban Development served as the executing agency for the loan, which was in the amount of $7,500,000, with the original disbursement period of 60 months or 5 years from the effective date of the contract. The program was to be completed, Mr. Speaker, by 12th of August 2017. The general objective of the project was to promote human capital accumulation and poverty alleviation through the consolidation of existing programs into a conditional cash transfer program called RISE. The project included the following components: 1, institutional strengthening; 2, implementation of a conditional cash transfer program; and 3, monitoring and evaluation. The program was targeted to the poor and focused on changing behavior to improve educational achievement and a healthier lifestyle among families living in poverty. It was designed to amalgamate the uniform and food assistance programs and to introduce a new payment delivery system, a Visa prepaid card. Mr. Speaker, the program is designed for beneficiaries to fulfill pre-specified education and health conditions. The objectives of RISE are to deliver services more efficiently through the new payment method, reduce poverty, improve educational achievement, and promote a healthier lifestyle among children. The aim of this project was to replace the existing cash and in-kind programs, consisting of food and uniform assistance. Other programs of rent, utilities, and burial assistance implemented through the Department of Social Services within the Ministry of Social Services and Urban Development were to remain. Mr. Speaker, the total cost of implementing the program was $9,760,000. The government of the Bahamas cash and in-kind contribution to this program is in the amount of $2,260,000. Mr. Speaker, notwithstanding the fact that I've been advised $4,093,196.27 of the loan funds have been drawn down for the program's development to date. Unfortunately, the pilot suffered significant challenges over the 5-year period. Consequently, there has only been a partial implementation of the required deliverables, with the most notable ones being the development of a management information system inclusive of a proxy means test and the Visa prepaid debit card system. While some RISE cards were approved for issue only weeks before the expiration of the program, they could not be effectively uploaded in time for distribution, Mr. Speaker. The IDB had previously written of their concerns, and it was only proper that the program be reviewed in light of the concerns raised as we approached the expiration deadline. Under the circumstance, no RISE cards could be approved for last-minute upload. The program, Mr. Speaker, was unfortunately challenged. Shortly after coming into office, on the 27th of July 2017, the IDB gave notice that the project would close with effect from the 31st of August 2017. What seemed to be, for the most part, due to the inherited shortcomings, Mr. Speaker, with regard to the timely implementation of the deliverables in accordance to the contract within the 5-year period. Mr. Speaker, I have therefore advised the Cabinet of the Bahamas of the IDB's communication and recommended that the Attorney General's office review the contract and the matters that arise as a result of its natural conclusion. Notwithstanding its closure, as communicated by the IDB, specific components of the program will be tweaked and adopted, inclusive of the Visa prepaid card system, the management information system for registration of clients, and the objective eligibility criteria implemented by way of the proxy means test as an alternative means of socio-analysis. Mr. Speaker, the discontinuance of the RISE program, a trial project, is not expected to diminish the level of service or programs offered by the Department of Social Services. But we expect that as a result of the additional experience and knowledge, we will enhance our services and better assist those with the greatest needs, with a view to assisting them as they transition to a state where they do not have to depend on government assistance, so that, Mr. Speaker, we are able to accommodate those that require our help for a specific period. Mr. Speaker, I must hasten to add that social service programs are provided for those in need and during the period of need. Mr. Speaker, I have directed that prospective clients assessed under the RISE program be evaluated or re-evaluated on a case-by-case basis, and given priority with a view to determining whether and which individuals qualify for assistance and can be accommodated under the existing service regime. Mr. Speaker, at the conclusion of the program, I wish to acknowledge and thank our partners in the program, particularly the Inter-American Development Bank, other ministries inclusive of the Ministry of Health, Education, Finance, and other agencies, including the Department of Information Technology and Statistics, international agencies, including the Johns Hopkins University, non-governmental organizations, and others that have partnered with us during the implementation of the RISE project, including the RISE team that worked together during the past 5 years. Mr. Speaker, it would be remiss of me not to also thank the former Minister of Social Services for the work that she would have done in leading the way in respect to the project. All are to be commended for the role they have played and continue to play in the empowerment of our people. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude my communication, I wish to thank Parliamentary Secretary and the Honorable Member for the Golden Isles constituency, the Honorable Vaughn Miller, Permanent Secretary of Social Services, Ms. Cora Bain Colbrook, Acting Director in the Department of Social Services, Ms. Lillian Quant-Forbes, and the entire management and staff that fall under the Ministry of Social Services and Urban Development, and all divisions that fall within my portfolio. In addition, Mr. Speaker, to the fine team at Urban Renewal, who all in one way or the other gave their service courageously and sacrificially, many leaving the comfort of their homes and families, Mr. Speaker, to prepare and deliver food parcels over that period of the hurricane passage. Mr. Speaker, they were there to care for those who needed shelter and special care and counseling in a time of impending crisis. Mr. Speaker, once again, I thank the people of the constituency of Seabreeze who have placed their trust in me to bring change for the betterment of our people. Mr. Speaker, now is no time to complain, neither to criticize, but now is the time to show that we care. The late Mahatma Gandhi, notable Indian leader and the nominee of the Nobel Peace Prize, said, and I quote, "The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others." May the good Lord continue to bless our people on these great islands of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas.
Order that the communication be brought up. Order that the communication do lie on the table. Further statements and communication by ministers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I only want to advise this Honorable House that I've received a report from the principal advisor to the Prime Minister of Dominica, who had advised me that at about 4:30 a.m. he had heard from the Prime Minister, who was doing well, and the Prime Minister would be communicating via the nation, via the world soon via satellite, and that Dominica had taken a terrible hit by Hurricane Maria, and quite a number of the homes are destroyed without roofs. The hospital has taken a terrible beating, as they describe it, and patient care has been compromised. There are no utilities, light, water, telephone are out of service, and they're asking if we can assist in any way. They would need food, water, and especially tarpaulin for a roof, and they're in urgent need of assistance. I'm asking all caring Bahamians, many of whom who have families in Dominica, to kindly assist as much as possible. Because should we have been in a similar situation, then we too would have been asking for help. And this is a moment and a time when Bahamians can be true to their word to show that we are a caring and responsible nation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Further statements and communications by ministers? None. Communications by the clerk?
You don't talk everything down.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Messages from the Governor General?
No, sir.
Messages from the Senate? Motions for leave of absence, leave to resigncy, and new writs? Presentations of petitions? Presentation of reports of committees? Adoption of reports of committees? First reading of bills? Chair recognizes the honorable member for Yamacraw.
Mr. Speaker, I rise and beg leave to introduce and have first read for the first time a bill for an act to amend the Constitution to provide for the establishment of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and for matters connected thereto. Mr. Speaker,
Yes.
with your leave, sir, on the laying of the bill, may I have just 2 minutes just to bring remarks on the importance of the bill?
Yes, go ahead, honorable.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Speaker, this bill, the Constitution Amendment Bill for 2017, which provides for an act to make provisions for an independent public prosecutor, is one of the innovative and contemporary pieces of legislation that my government intends to bring. Our government. Thank If Sinans was here, you'd have said you didn't get it right. Not in your wildest dreams. But Mr. Speaker, this bill represents one of the contemporary and innovative pieces of legislation that we intend to present to this honorable House. Internationally, Mr. Speaker, both internationally, as an international custom, it is trite to find within the Constitution or the legal framework of any society, first world or second or third world countries, the majority, that you would have an independent prosecutor. Mr. Speaker, this topic or the phenomenon of an independent prosecutor in the Bahamas was articulated by some of our most prominent legal luminaries in the persons of Ms. Alfred Sayers, QC, former Attorney General for the Progressive Liberal Party, Senior Justice, now sitting Justice Stephen Isaacs, and the Bahamas Bar Association. And I quite recall when Mr. Sayers made a presentation that was discussing this matter at one of the symposiums put on by the Bahamas Bar Association. He articulated the difficulty experienced as a cabinet minister when one of his cabinet colleagues faced certain charges. It also brought, and he expressed some concerns when one of the members, former members for Michael, had to deal with a situation that involved one of the administrators in the Family Islands, and what would happen where you have colleagues that are sitting in cabinet and then you have to bring legislation or you have to prosecute those persons. And both Mr. Sayers, Justice Isaacs, and most certainly the bar and the community at large, civil society, cried or lamented the fact that we did not have legislation to address what is a trite situation. Mr. Speaker, so in that vein, we sought to bring this legislation. One of the other things that it will address, no more in the Commonwealth of the Bahamas will you have, in terms of nolle prosequis, will you have attorney generals having to consult on matters of this sort. So what the bill seeks to do, will do, Mr. Speaker, is all civil prosecutions will be done or will be controlled by the Attorney General, and criminal prosecutions by the Director of Public Prosecution, with some slight exceptions in matters of national security, public policy. The AG will still retain some control over that. But I would like to commend the government led by the member for Kalani, my Prime Minister, for bringing this legislation. And I would just like to say to the Bahamian public that they will see very shortly that this government, which is a proactive government, a government of the people, a government that is contemporary, will bring other contemporary legislation to this House. So this, I've signed the legislation. I will hand it over to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there a second? It has been moved and seconded that the following bill be introduced and read a first time. A bill for an act to amend the Constitution to provide for the establishment of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution and for matters connected thereto. Yes, most certainly. The chair recognizes the member for Carmichael.
Very technical amendment. The bill to amend, for not to amend the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. If we insert the words of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker. If you would insert the words of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas, upon the words, between the words Constitution and this,
Yes.
and if you may have unanimous consent on that. If we may have unanimous
Okay. Okay, the amended bill is a bill for an act to amend the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to provide for the establishment of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and for matters connected thereto. As many as are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will rise. Order that the bill be read for the first time.
A bill for an act to amend the Constitution of the Commonwealth of the Bahamas to provide for the establishment of the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions and for matters connected thereto.
Further readings,
For the first reading.
further first readings of bills, and second reading and committal of bills, committee of the whole House, third reading and passing of bills, consideration of the Senate's amendment, resolutions,
Speaker, I move as stated we suspend. The House upon its rise suspend until Wednesday, 27th September. At this time, Speaker, members will debate the resolution of the site.
Is there a seconder? It has been moved and seconded that the business of this House, Honorable House, suspend to the 27th of September at 10 a.m. Those who are in favor will remain seated. Those who oppose will rise. The business of this House stands suspended until the 27th of September at 10 a.m.